So let me now introduce Mary. It is somewhat of the intentional design of the Opportunity Institute that the arc of our provocation speakers begins with data and ends with the heart. Oftentimes with a stop in between, it's some big idea, such as yesterday's talk on the relationship between belonging and mattering. And so today, we arrive at the heart. In her recently published book, Leading from the Margins, College Leadership from Unexpected Places, Mary Dana Hinton tells the story of approaching her high school guidance counselor in the 10th grade to explore her options for going to college, which her mother had impressed upon her was the only real way out of their economic situation and toward a brighter future. Mary goes on to describe how that counselor explained to her, now I'm quoting from the book, "College was not an option for me as a Black woman. She told me essentially that my place in the world on the margins had been defined by others and that I was to simply accept that place. Her goal was to reduce me in the margins and remind me of my marginality." And so, as Mary writes in the book, in that moment, I made the decision to be defiant by embracing the margins. For me, defiance was a positive motivating force and a strength I gained from living on the margins. I've had the great honor and pleasure of getting to know and work with Mary Dana Hinton over the past couple of years. And I would say three words: margins, defiance, and also love pretty well capture the trinity of her approach to the world. She puts all three of these to use in serving as the president of Hollins University, a private institution in conservative Southwest Virginia. As a case in point, their new strategic plan opens with phrases like integrative learning practices, equity-minded access, compassionate challenge, and holistic wellness. Before Mary became president at Hollins University, she served as the president of the College of St. Benedict in Minnesota. Her scholarship focuses on higher education leadership, strategic planning, the role of education in peace building, African-American religious history, and inclusion in higher education. She's the author of The Commercial Church, Black Churches and the New Religious Marketplace in America, a frequent op-ed contributor across higher ed publications. Her new book, Leading from the Margins, was published earlier this year by Johns Hopkins University Press. I'll just add in closing, I have walked around the Hollins University campus with Mary, and I have seen firsthand how every single being we encountered, whether they're on the grounds crew, the staff setting up student orientation, or a random student crossing the campus, or even the horses that Hollins owns, every one of them comes alive to Mary when they see her, because Mary becomes so visibly alive when she sees them. It is a great pleasure to introduce Mary to offer our final provocation, From the Margins to the Heart.
Wow, Randy, that is honestly the best introduction I've ever heard. Thank you for your willingness to see my heart. Thank you for the invitation to be with the group today. I'm so excited to have time with you. I'm honored to be with you. As I was looking at the attendee list, I felt like these are my people in this room. Thank you for doing this work in a moment when it's not easy. And I say that thank you because a large part of me remains that 10th grade girl who was told she couldn't go to college. My life was crafted in the margins. As a poor Black girl in the rural South, my options felt and objectively were very limited. In the community in which I grew up, resources and opportunities were scarce. The average family income at age 35 today is $35,000. The majority of my peers, teenagers, had children. Unemployment is rampant. And I want to be clear that these outcomes were not due to any sort of shortcomings on the part of the people. Rather, these outcomes are the result of systems, structures, and policies that seek to make marginalization a way of life, a generational curse. In my home community, the systemic failures bestowed upon so many poor rural communities were more than evident. And for far too many years, I believed that marginalization was my future. That, in fact, if I wanted to be a leader, it was essential that I aspire to goals and ways of being in the world that separated me from my marginalized identities. I believe that the road to success was to remove myself from, pack away, and avoid the margins. It was many decades into my life before I realized that the margins were not the source of my greatest liabilities, but instead the source of my greatest strength. I eventually realized that all those quiet leadership qualities that had had an outsized impact on my life and my leadership success were qualities acquired within the margins. For those of us who hail from the margins, our ability to listen with care and work across difference makes us great collaborators. Knowing what it is to yearn for something has catalyzed a keen sense of observation and patience in us. Figuring out how to survive offered me a master class in strategic planning. So, given my background in the margins, it's no surprise that much of my work has been focused on creating structures, policies, and programs that promote inclusion and equity and bringing access and opportunity to the margins. As someone who was born on and now chooses life within the margins, my aim has been to find ways to honor the voices of those from the margins and to provide them, as you are, with the opportunities needed to be successful. Again, my professional life was focused on bringing people to the margins and around the margins. So it's unsurprising that some of the initiatives of which I'm most proud have had a great deal to do with the work of DEI, or using a term I coined in my last presidency, transformational inclusion. To me, transformational inclusion meant creating the opportunity for every person in the community to have access to the very best education the institution has to offer, and for them to be able to positively transform the institution through their presence. Both individually and as part of an institution, my goal was to provide an education for all in order to support social, economic, and civic mobility. My work with inclusion was simply to ensure educational opportunity for all young people. You see, to me, education, inclusion, freedom, and leadership are inseparable. Let me say that again. Education, inclusion, freedom, and leadership are inseparable. So let's hear from a few people who, long before I entered this work, spoke about that transformative power of education. And I'd like to begin with Paulo Freire, a philosopher and educator. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Freire wrote, quote, "There's no such thing as neutral education. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom. The practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world," end quote. I get chills still listening to that. So there are several elements that we can excerpt from this quote. First, education is never neutral. And I think this is especially important to note today, as there's a great deal of conversation about the need for campus neutrality. However, Freire would say that it's not ultimately possible. Education is either going to perpetuate present systems or it's going to challenge the status quo and facilitate freedom. He calls us to confront reality secured and emboldened by our freedom, determined to help others achieve the same. And while he is one of my favorite thinkers, for some, Freire is too liberal, too progressive to even consider. So I want to balance that perspective with another more traditional one, that of founding father Benjamin Rush. In 1786, Rush, an abolitionist and advocate for women's rights, wrote, quote, "Freedom can exist only in the society of knowledge. Without learning, men are incapable of knowing their rights. And where learning is confined to a few people, liberty can be neither equal nor universal." I'll repeat a part of that again. Where learning is confined to a few people, liberty can be neither equal nor universal. Like Freire after him, Rush is arguing that not only is education essential to the individual, but education is essential to our society and in the US democracy. In my reading, from Rush to Freire, we learn about the transformational impact of education. For education to be transformational and to intentionally lift up and support those on the margins, I'm suggesting that we do the work of education creatively, with multiple perspectives at play, and always privileging the human experience of those we encounter. I'm asking that you believe that the essence of an education, the freeing of minds, also demands the freeing and nurturing of imagination and heart. Not only our students' imaginations and hearts, but the imagination and hearts of each of us, every one of us, unconstrained by title or by task. But I will be the first to say, this is not easy in today's environment. Perhaps, in fact, there's never been a more difficult moment in which to be a leader in higher education. As political rhetoric becomes more and more divided and partisan, individuals have come to expect their institutional leaders to pick sides for the institution. At the same time, as trust in higher education and in all institutions wanes, leaders are less likely to be given the benefit of the doubt. The list of challenges goes on. Without a doubt, leadership in higher education is the most challenging, volatile, and disorienting it has ever been. In my 10 years of being a college president, I've never experienced the multitude of competing, often incompatible demands that higher education faces today. To lean in the direction of one group is viewed as an abject dismissal of another. To suggest that we are all together in the enterprise is viewed as naive. And the issues we face are themselves more challenging. On many campuses, we are facing an existential crisis. If we do not rectify our business model, grow enrollment, retain highly qualified faculty and staff, and better serve our students, we simply will not survive. Now, I can wholly accept and understand the argument that if you aren't able to do these things, you aren't competitive. But for many of us, we are attempting to rapidly undo years of status quo in an industry that was created to conserve knowledge and often resist change. So as a result, our role as educators is often compromised by fear. We live in fear of alienating our market, our students, by educating them about some harsh realities and allowing them to experience life outside of the bubble. For example, we cannot truly educate students and simultaneously protect them from the fact that they will encounter ideologies and perspectives different than their own. The missions of most institutions, in fact, demand that we expose our students to multiple diverse viewpoints. To be educated is to have experience and engagement with other ideas and people. To educate is to create the cognitive dissonance that's necessary to allow learning to take place. But at a moment when the very words diversity, equity, and inclusion are viewed as triggering or risky, and when the entire sector is at stake, it is easy to feel and actually be hopeless. However, it is also a moment to take a step back and ask why this work matters and how we can sustain ourselves to move forward despite the headwinds we face. To explore what options might we avail ourselves of to inclusively educate when so few options, if any, are readily visible. Allow me to share an experience from nearly 2 days ago. 2 decades ago, my apologies. At the time, I was serving a president who did magnificent things for the institution. And honestly, without their leadership, it is entirely possible that the institution would not be around today. At that time, I had major responsibility for retention, and as each of you do, I provided frequent updates to the cabinet and occasionally the board. And on one occasion, I needed to report less than good news. We had not met our retention target, which is a difficult, I'm going to say painful thing to report. But I felt I needed to be forthright about where we landed, and I offered the news without excuses. To this day, and remember, this was nearly 2 decades ago, but to this day, I can recall the president looking and pointing at me as they eviscerated me in front of the cabinet. I cannot deny that I had not met the target. I can assure you I didn't deserve to be spoken to in that way. At that moment, I wrote down on a notepad, you can be a successful leader without compromising the humanity of others. I have carried that ripped off sheet of notepaper with me now for nearly 2 decades. It has served as a powerful reminder of many things, but most of all, that the people who work with me and for me are human beings. That institutional success at the expense of their humanity is not desirable, nor, I would argue, possible. And that to believe otherwise is a perilous state at which to arrive. You see, what I learned in that memorable moment and what has shaped my own leadership, perhaps more than anything else, and especially in these difficult times, is that in order to lead, one must begin with a heart for the mission, a heart for the institution, a heart for people. To lead, then, demands that a leader share their deep humanity with those around them. And this is where love enters the conversation. Now, let me begin by explaining the type of love I'm talking about. Of course, this is not eros or romantic love. That is out of bounds. I am talking about agape. Fry wrote, quote, agape relates closely with spiritual leadership based on values like forgiveness, kindness, integrity, compassion, honesty, patience, trust, and humility. Agape, like spiritual leadership, involves treating followers as complete persons with physical, mental, and spiritual needs. Another set of researchers, Carvalho and Mulla, suggest that agape love is not only how you view the other, but how you actively engage with those around you. They write, quote, agape is a form of love that involves intentionally prompting well-being in response to acts, persons, or structures that promote ill-being through humility, self-sacrifice, forgiveness, empathy, emotional control, and impartiality, end quote. Agape love demands that you are attentive to and intentional about how you engage with each person around you. So given all the negatives, mistrust, polarization, lack of forgiveness, lack of room for error, and all the other negatives, I believe that our only way forward, our only way to educate all those around us, our only way to lift up the margins, our only way to sustain our campus communities is to invoke leadership based on radical love. Now, allow me to be clear. I do not naturally love every person I encounter all the time. I am a human being who fails. However, as the president, as a leader, I endeavor to intentionally choose to engage and lead with love for and with every person I have the privilege of leading. I choose and I have to center them and their needs in order to move my institution forward. So whether you choose to frame love as agape or compassionate leadership, or even servant leadership, love is a compelling and demanding leadership choice. And I can certainly understand that many people think if you are the leader, you especially don't need to concern yourself with love. That in fact, you have the unique authority or ability to not have to worry about love, that you have the power to do what you want. But I believe that this bifurcation of love and power is both artificial and harmful. Rather, as a strong leader, as a good leader, as an effective leader, it is critically important to understand the power of leading from and with love. The power is both positive in how one leads, but it also demands that difficult ideas, topics, people, and situations be approached with love. In these challenging times, we must elevate love, forgiveness, integrity, and trust for ourselves and for others. We have to live these practices, not merely in words, but in the environments we create and our posture in the world. And for these reasons, it is because, not despite all of the many problems we face in higher education, that I am encouraging you to choose love. King referred to love as the moral cosmos, the highest good. I simply believe it is what will save our collective spirits and save our institutions. For example, if we're called to change our institutions to make them sustainable, then we need to think carefully about what that change should look like. Srinivas Koka wrote, quote, "Change is created by effective leadership and is about all the things that are hard to measure. Effective leadership is about feelings because feelings drive culture. He writes, high-performing, industry-leading organizations place significant emphasis on a culture that is built around feelings because it is these feelings that lead to community and collaboration. The elephant in the room, however, is the feeling that no one wants to talk about at work, but which is the final arbiter of whether an environment is the absolute best it can be. And that feeling is love. So the first transformative step, and it requires courage that a leader must take, is to step outside traditional lines and use words like love, community, belonging as part of everyday conversation. Only by discussing these feelings will a leader establish the authenticity needed to convince the team members that she or he is committed, end quote. So if our collective work as leaders, as educators, is to make a place better, then in order to be faithful to the time and place we are serving, we must reflect love. Not only must we reflect love, but we must also teach it. Our institutions have a curriculum that demands love. And here, I'm not talking about gen ed or major. I'm talking about the soul of who we are in higher education. For leaders in higher education, especially those aligned with the liberal arts, there must be a very special response to this demand for love. In fact, to lead within or adjacent to the liberal arts sparks a compelling need for love as an institutional value. My favorite explication of the power of the liberal arts comes from Only Connect, The Goals of a Liberal Education by William Cronin. This wondrously written piece about the liberal arts explains the beauty and the demands of the type of education we are so privileged to experience. In it, Cronin shares the following. Liberal education nurtures human freedom in the service of human community, which is to say that in the end, it celebrates love. More than anything else, Cronin writes, being an educated person means being able to see the connections that allow one to make sense of the world and act within it in creative ways. He concludes, whether we speak of our schools or our universities or ourselves, I hope we will hold fast to this as our constant practice in the full depth and richness of its many meanings. Only connect. For learning to happen and to excel in the tradition of the liberal arts, students, faculty, and staff all need to be able to open their minds and their hearts to one another. We have to trust one another enough to listen, to take in, to engage. To convert knowledge to wisdom, we need to be able to be vulnerable to our humanity and to love. And in this age of AI, humanity and love are even more critical. To be honest, students don't need us to simply collect information. They can find all the facts and falsehoods they want on their phone. And while they don't need us to collect information any longer, they desperately need us for knowledge and for wisdom. They need to be willing to connect with us, to convert volumes of information to an education. And that is the kind of thinking that generative AI cannot master in the ways humans can. Leading with love compels us to act in ways that are compassionate, expansive, and inviting. When our students feel that, then they are open to love and to learning. But I need you to know that choosing to lead with love is not going to be easy. I am not naive, and I know that many of you are wondering, is she okay? I get it. Love is hard. When you see people actively and without repercussions erasing your history, it is hard to love. When I saw my sister president at Harvard get worn down, it was hard to love. When you face your own professional challenges, it's hard to love. When you're doing all the work and getting none of the credit, it's hard to love. When you can see success and yet each time you are near it, it is taken away because of lack of resources, or worse, lack of will. It is hard to love, but love we must. Love is the imperative of our missions. It's the key to our success. It's the hope of our culture, and it is the soul of our curriculum. Free minds are minds that can love freely. So I believe that what we are called to today and forevermore is to love one another. When we face the negativity of the world today, we must turn to love. When we feel trounced upon, we must turn to love. When we not only feel downtrodden, but are downtrodden, we have to, with intention and good conscience, turn to love, as challenging as that may be. So let me wrap this up with how we apply this in our daily lives. First, proclaim what you stand for. These days, it is so much easier to shout out what you are against, to rail against systems, to declare the faults of the world, and to decry the status quo. What I find to be rare and precious in the world today is a statement about what one stands for. What is the platform from which you will make decisions? What are those things that are your permanent North Star, regardless of the happenings in the world around you? What must be defended always? What guides you when so little around you makes sense? And I believe that responding to these questions internally and publicly and proactively is, I would argue, the agape work of leaders today. Start by sharing who you are for and what you are for. If you are for love, tell everyone. If you are for hope, spread the word. Have that inform how you start or end a class or a meeting, whether or not you send an email, how you reach out to a colleague. Share your vocational aspirations and heart of leadership with others and invite them to do the same with you. Next, let's decide to have the courage to open our hearts and to ponder agape. How will you learn more about agape as a leadership theory? And can you make a commitment to doing so? Can you commit to doing one thing differently based on what you learn? Let's decide to be appropriately vulnerable in our professional relationships and in our spaces with students. In our daily tasks, let's choose to seek and share hearts in our biggest and smallest moments. Can we agree to be in deep relationship with those around us, recognizing that this is emotional labor, but that the payoff will benefit us both personally and professionally? Let's invoke David Scobie's notion of relentless welcome. Let's not limit welcome to our newest community members. A first day is not the only moment to extend welcome, care, support, compassion, and curiosity. Let's ask how we can make our longest serving employees or our most senior students feel newly welcome today. I would add that you should also try to find a way to relentlessly welcome yourself. Find that joy that once brought you into this work. Even if you have one foot out the door, remember that joy, because that joy was less about the place and more about your heart. When your heart felt worthy, when your work felt sacred, when your humanity felt honored. When you felt bright, new agape love, find that and know that that is who you are and what you deserve. There are many ways that you can choose to find, nurture, and lead with love. The way one engages the conversation will vary. Whatever the entry point, however, it is important that you understand the power of leading from and with love. Long ago, Martin Luther King wrote, quote, "And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with a resignation of power and power with a denial of love. But power at its best is implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." End quote. Love implementing the demands of justice. Power correcting everything that stands against love. That's where I hope love leads each of you. And we can take solace in knowing that with love as our guide, things do change. My father was born the son of formerly enslaved people and was never granted an education. I am the daughter of a woman who was born in North Carolina in 1926. At the age of 94, my mother died, never having been issued a birth certificate because her humanity was not deemed worthy. But with love, they raised the president of Hollins University. I honor and embrace that every day. It fuels my passion for education and nourishes a heart filled with love. I hope that love leads each of you too. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you.
Wow, Mary. That was moving, inspirational, and challenging. And it moved me to tears, even though I read it multiple times this morning already. That was incredible.
Thank you so much.
And I realized that really what you're trying to do in your talk is to move love from the margins to the heart of higher education.
That's exactly it. I have not thought of it that way, but that is exactly it.
So thank you. That was really just wonderful and a fantastic place for our final provocation. I have like these two really extensive, nerdy, geeky questions teed up that I'm trying to figure out the transition to even start to ask. But and for those yeah, who would like to drop a question in the chat, of course, we have a bit of time for Q&A and back and forth. Some really beautiful things being said in the chat.
Thank you. And I'm not great at monitoring the chat, so thank you so much.
Well, let's just say you're getting a lot of love in the chat.
Thank you. I'm sending all the love. I'm definitely sending back to each of you.
So yeah, and let me turn over to Heidi who wants to make a comment.
Thank you. Hi, Heidi.
Hey, Mary. I feel like maybe I should have given myself more than the 30 seconds that I gave myself to recover emotionally a little bit from your talk before unmuting. So I'm 4 weeks from 2 days ago.
Mhm.
We're welcoming a cohort of students to Georgetown to join us in the summer bridge program to start their to become members of our community, right? And
Yeah.
begin their time with us as undergrads. So I teach a bio course and we usually start with some biology, but I'm thinking of starting with this recording.
Oh.
Because we need them to see themselves as leaders, right? I mean, your call to leadership isn't just, although Lord knows we all are going to show it to our campus leaders, I believe, after this. The brilliant suggestion was made in the chat by Monica. But I also realized I want to show it to my students because I think they need this message too. And so I'm wondering, you talk to students all the time. Have you given versions of this to your students?
Um,
And what happens?
Yeah, we talk about love a lot at Hollins. And so I joined Hollins in 2020 after my presidency at St. Ben. So 2020 was a really difficult time. And how do you lead in a pandemic? And how do you act as a student during a pandemic? And so we were physically on the same campus, but we had really sort of stringent rules. So we couldn't be together in the ways we normally would. So I started talking to them about love and seeing them. I think what our current generation needs, Heidi, more than they're even able to articulate, and perhaps more than we're able to articulate for them, is the sense that they are enough and that they are worthy of love, just as they are. And so we talk about that a lot at Hollins. And, during COVID, we talked about it. If you are anxious, that's okay. You're still loved. You're still worthy. You're still in this conversation. If you're exhausted by the pandemic, that's okay. You still have to follow these rules, but that's okay. We see you and you're enough. And I have found students to be so receptive to this notion if it comes from an authentic place. So I don't think and it would with you, Heidi, and Susanna, and others. It's not something you can fake. And I don't, that sounds harsh and I don't mean it to, but you have to really feel it because students, like our children, can sniff out hypocrisy in about half a second flat. You have to really feel it. Why do I love my students? Because they worked so hard to get here. And because Hollins is a women's college, I should share with folks. Women are told we are not enough every day, like every chance someone gets, they tell us we're not enough. I want my students to know that they are enough. I want my first gen students to know this is your home. So when I went off to Williams as an undergraduate, I tell people all the time, I had a Jerry curl and a Southern accent, and that was it. And as much as I love to learn the liberal arts at Williams College, it never felt like home because it wasn't built for me. I was never going to be enough there. And I think the college has changed tremendously. It will always be credited with my love of the liberal arts. But if you're going to lead today, I think an imperative, whether you're leading in the classroom or leading in the president's office, the imperative is to make sure no student feels a sense of shame or that they are inferior on your campus. And so students have been incredibly receptive to it. I hope that's helpful, Heidi. Sorry I went on so long.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Mary.
Absolutely.
Mary, I'm gonna just because I want everyone to see it and I want to then pivot a question off of it. I'm dropping in the chat. This is the first sentence of the Hollins University new strategic plan. And it says by 2030, Hollins will have implemented integrative learning practices, equity-minded access policies, extensive experiential learning, compassionate challenge, and a holistic wellness focus to meet our mission call and ensure our sustainability. And certainly such a mission statement, a lot of us would feel like wind at our back if that was truly the strategic plan driving our institutions. The question I want to ask on behalf of folks here is, so that's a really strong statement of like the why and what it is we're trying to strive for. Curious if there's anything you can say that then because this is just the tip of the iceberg of this strategic plan, which I know went through a many phase process with your faculty and students and staff. How would you say, are there some things that are different about the how that having such a why, challenges? Like, is there a different way of doing business or a different way of thinking about business if this is your why versus the older paradigm?
Yeah, I think so, Randy. So our strategic plan has 3 gears that are alluded to, and they're called gears. And I think Randy knows this. They're called gears because you can't work on one without moving the other one. So the 3 gears are access, academic excellence, and wellness. And I share those with you because I want to tell you about part of one gear, our academic excellence gear, which you might think, oh, well, that's all about, what's happening in the classroom. And there's a lot of that. It's about pedagogy and curriculum. But one of the heart pieces of that gear is a humane workplace for thriving. Because one of the things that we know is that if we don't invest in our faculty and staff and create a humane workplace, our faculty and staff won't thrive. And if they don't thrive, or if they don't feel loved, how is that then going to become the culture for our students, right? Where they're going to feel that. So I think it's very easy for us to love and invest in and support our students. What I think has been missing in higher education, and someone I did see as I was scrolling through the chat, someone talked about bullying colleagues. Why is that okay in higher education? We have resisted any talk about the emotional component of education that's so essential to learning. And yet we often treat our colleagues and each other as if they don't matter, as if they don't have that same emotional component. So our strategic plan explicitly calls out the need for that humane workplace for thriving. And it's folks who are building it. The how is impacted when we talk about access, of course. We believe any young woman who wants a Hollins education should have the financial support to get there. And we're working really hard on that. But we also believe that our faculty, staff, students need to be well. And we're focused on that in 9 dimensions. This is not about an updated fitness center. This is about holistic wellness that focuses on things like resilience coaching. And so I believe those are all of the components that contribute not only to being able to love another person, but that contribute to being able to love and trust yourself. And I think that's just critically important today. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. Community doesn't happen in a vacuum. We want to make visible those things that tether our hearts to one another.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think that image of the 3 gears and just asserting from the outset that they all turn together, access, wellness, and academic excellence. There's a question in the chat about in the strategic plan challenge. Can you clarify what we're referring to as compassionate challenge? The phrase.
I'm actually, going to drop a link in the chat for everyone. So I don't know if you've had a chance to read Sarah Rose Kavanaugh's Mind Over Monsters, but in this book, and she's lovely, she would make a great provocateur. She talks about the need to have deep compassion for our students and their experiences and the challenges they face, but to also be willing to challenge them, to give them the opportunity to grow and thrive. It's a book that we read as a campus, and Sarah Rose Kavanaugh came to our campus in March or April and did workshops across the campus with folks. So that it is really referring to that what I said towards the end, right? Like, love is deep and powerful. It's not an abdication of holding people accountable. You have to find compassionate ways to do both. And so that's what we're referencing there. I really encourage you to take a look at her book.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that question. Okay, just appreciation from Monica. I'll ask maybe one final question. And I think it refers to something that Monica had put in the chat much earlier in the talk about if there's no data to back up love, it's hard to get people to buy in. That's not exactly what Monica said,
Yeah.
but I think that's what she was implying. And what it reminded me of was thinking that many of the folks here are spending some of their time strategizing, their time here in the Institute strategizing how to help make the case for the importance of holistic student success to the people they report to, provosts, vice provosts, sometimes presidents and chancellors, or how they can help the people they report to make the case for this work for others, that the investment in holistic student success is worth it. I think that gets to the notion of how do you balance this kind of deep centrality of love with data and other things that matter to other people. So as a president, do you have any closing advice for our participants on the best ways to make this case for holistic student success, rooted from this kind of affective place, but in ways that are ultimately pragmatic?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it is very pragmatic, and the data, you can find the data in a lot of places. I think my colleague and role model, Jillian Kinsey, has been a part of the Institute. There's a lot of retention data. When you look at Nessie, there are questions about belonging and mattering, questions that don't use love necessarily, but that are getting to the heart of that. And so we're looking at our data to see, are we seeing some improving trends with retention? And we are. And how can we understand that better? How can we do focus groups? We did some racial climate surveys over the past 18 months with faculty, staff, and students. And you can see students, particularly, though not exclusively, commenting on how they feel protected. Students say to me all the time, I know you love us, but I need X. Loving them doesn't solve all the problems, but they know that Hollins is a place where they are cared for. You can look at it in how students talk about Hollins to people who come visit on campus. So I think you can find actual hard data. There are plenty of surveys out there for that. And I'm a data head. I want to be super clear. Jillian's a role model because I've loved Nessie for a long, long time. I love data. But we live in a world where data will move some people and it won't move others, and the heart moves some and not others. You have to be able to really think about both. But I will tell you, I told Randy I would come up with a more eloquent way of saying this, and I wasn't able to. If you're not committed to student success, I don't know why this is where you're working. I mean, I guess I don't understand that. Student success is the heart of the entire enterprise. And if that's not what you're focused on, what are you focused on? And maybe it's in a more generous way, asking that question. Maybe it starts with a question, what moves your heart about this work? And if the answer is not the success of students, then the person needs to just take a little step back and just ponder why they're in the work.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop. Amen to that. And we got a truth from Catherine in the in the chat on this with the same sentiment. So Mary, thank you. Fantastic way to end our provocations, and for giving so many people, just the inspiration and the juice to keep moving. So thank you so much for sharing your morning with us.
Absolutely.
And thank you to everyone else for your
Thank
incredible
you.
participation and your presence and your engagement and the work that you do. And we'll look forward to seeing you all shortly in the afternoon sessions, and then your team time, and then we will follow up with our summary and other kinds of resources. So thank you all very much. Really grateful to you, and thank you again, Mary, for an amazing way to
Thank you.
begin.
Thank you, everyone.